Welcome to Ask Fear and Greed, where we take your questions and do our best to answer them. I'm Michael Thompson, and good afternoon, Sean Aylmer.
Good afternoon, Michael.
Sean, goodness me, today's question comes from Dave, and he shared it with us via the website. He went to fearandgreed.com.au and he sent his question in through there. You can also do it through LinkedIn or Facebook or Instagram, any of the social media platforms really, but Dave's done it via the website. He says, one for Ask Fear and Greed. Sean uses various terms for share price movements. He's seen right through you here, hasn't he?
Yep.
And he says, I wonder which ones actually mean something and which ones are just to make more interesting copy. I assume, he says, bounced is different from rose and spiked is different from increased. Plunged is different from dropped. Or is it? For me, anything less than a 5% change is just noise if you're not a day trader. So that's interesting. Can Sean please give us a definitive list of the phrases to pay attention to? I'm looking forward to new terms like rocketed and limped along.
Oh, Dave, you're a man after my own heart. Well,
it's glorious, isn't it?
Yeah, you have called me out pretty well, because you can't just say the share market rose, the share market fell every time. You've kind of got to add some colour to it. The bottom line in this, really the only terms that actually have a meaning, when a market goes up by 10% or down by 10%, it's officially known as a correction. So if I ever use the word correction, that means from the previous low or the previous peak, it has changed by 10%.
Okay.
So that's a correction. And then a boom and bust is actually 20%. So a market from its bottom to a new peak, if that's 20% or more, that's a boom market. And similarly, if it goes from a peak to 20% less, it's a bust market.
Is there a specific amount it has to fall in order to use the term crash?
So crash, no, there isn't a term, but a crash, certainly in journalism, we only ever used crash when it really fell. We're talking 10, 12 in a session. So when we're talking about boom and bust and corrections, they tend to be over a period of time. But when a crash, a 10%, 12%, 15% drop would be a crash. I don't tend to use the word crash unless that has happened. And I remember working as a journalist in October 2007, and the Fin Review talked about the market crashing. And I said, is it a crash? And I remember my editor at the time saying, well, if this is a crash, what is? The even more famous example was in 1928 when the Wall Street Journal, I think it was, or the New York Times, I think it was the Wall Street Journal, the first sentence the day after the big crash was, Wall Street crashed yesterday. That's it. That's just what the sentence said. So
wow.
That's crash. All these other terms that we're talking about, spiked tends to mean it went up and down. Peaked doesn't, it sort of means something similar, but not quite the down part, just sort of hit a peak. Plunged is certainly a big drop. Drop is just a smaller plunge.
So really, now we're just getting into the colour. Like plummeted. Do you like plummeted?
Nah, plummeted I don't like as a word, because plummeted to me means, that's a crash, isn't it?
Okay.
A plummet.
Right. What soared is nice, kind of soared. That's. I mean, when you see a company's, we're talking individual stocks here. If you see a share price shoot up by kind of 10 or 15% in a day, you would say that share price soared yesterday. I have done that in the afternoon report when I've been filling in for you, which is actually a confession. You probably didn't know that. I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, soared is. It is. You don't want to over egg it. And Dave's point here is anything less than 5% change is just noise, unless if you're not a day trader. I think that's right. The point here is that we say National Australia Bank went up yesterday 1.1%. It's not that much. It did hit a 17-year high. That's probably more interesting than the 1.1%. But Dave, you've got to understand, we're talking about the markets every day. And we sometimes do over-egg it. Perhaps that's the point. There are certain stocks like WiseTech Global. I have continually talked about that going up by 1% or 2% for months now. and I think it's up 70% over the last 12 months or so. So its cumulative effect of those small increases is certainly significant. But broadly, Dave's right. Don't get too excited if a market, share goes up 1 or 2% or down 1 or 2%, because it's quite easily going to reverse the next day.
And how about, I'm really just using this now as for my own education, how many kind of these sub indices need to be to finish the day down in order for it to be a sea of red?
The sea of red. So it's not even the sub indices. So you can actually have 2 sub indices up, 9 down, but the 2 are up, like financials and resources. So therefore the market ends up, if you know what I mean. So
gotcha. Okay. So really it's just overall then. You need an overall.
Yeah. The telecommunications index is basically Telstra. There's not a lot more. There are 3 or 4 companies. Sea of red, though, Michael, I reckon 75% you're allowed to say sea of red. 75%.
And before that, it's what? A lake of red, and then just a pond of red, and then just a trickle. There's just a trickle of red
creek,
today.
A creek of red running through the green. Yeah.
All right. Well, Sean, I've taken notes on this, and really the one thing that I have written down, as you can see, and I have circled over and over again, is just don't over-egg it. Is the take-home message here, which I feel like is a message that was tailored pretty much just for me.
the melodrama king.
Yeah. It's also a message that I probably will disregard. Dave, look, I hope we've answered your question. I think I've actually learnt a lot today. Not saying that I wasn't expecting to when we came into it, but you have certainly exceeded my expectations today, Sean.
Thank you very much. Take that as a compliment.
Oh, well, you should, because it's certainly intended as one. And thank you, Dave, for the question. If you have your own question that you would like to put to Sean, it can be something about language. It can be about business. It can be about the economy, be about anything, really. Relationships. We haven't counseled anyone through a breakup yet.
Happy to do that.
Then send your question in through LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, or do what Dave did and head to the website, fearandgreed.com.au. I'm Michael Thompson, and this is Ask Fear and Greed.